The parable of the Good Samaritan is so familiar that it can become almost too familiar. The moral seems simple enough: help those in need, be kind, be merciful, don't walk by. It's almost as simple as a children's moment there. But when we step back into the real world and the simplicity starts to break down, we live in a world marked by complexity and fear and division. In our time and in Jesus' time, there are insiders and outsiders, neighbors and strangers, people we trust and people we fear. But Jesus doesn't let the complexity be an excuse. He tells a story that pierces through all of our justifications and deflections, right to the core of what it means to love our neighbor as ourselves. The day before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, he preached on this very parable. He described the mindset of the priest and the Levite who passed by the wounded man. If I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? That's what they might have been thinking. And then Dr. King pointed out the transformative shift in the Samaritan's thinking. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? And that's the crux of this parable: not abstract theology, not cultural loyalty, not personal safety or convenience, but a concrete, risky, costly choice to stop and help a fellow human being. This story plays out again and again in the world around us, especially in how we respond to those who arrive among us in need: strangers, foreigners, refugees. Across the globe today, war and violence have displaced tens of millions of people. Families have fled cities leveled by bombs. Children have crossed deserts and oceans, hoping for a place to sleep in peace. And the United States is one of those countries where many of these people arrive seeking safety. They bring different languages and different faiths and different customs, and they bring unimaginable stories of survival. And as they arrive, we often have the same fears. What will happen to us if we let them in? Will we have enough? What if some of them are dangerous? What if our way of life changes? Those fears are real, but they are not new. They are the same fears the priest and the Levite likely had. That priest and that Levite, their jobs involved staying pure or clean, at least ritually. And if they touched a corpse, then we know that this unfortunate traveler had been beaten, it would greatly complicate their duties. So that helps to explain, if not excuse, their crossing to the other side of the road. Fear of danger, fear of contamination, fear of what might be lost. Yet Jesus points not to them, but to the Samaritan, the outsider, the presumed enemy, as the one who truly understood what it meant to be a neighbor. So just a little refresher about the Samaritans. They were a group descended from the Israelites who had formed after the Assyrian conquest in the northern part of Israel around 722 BCE. And they kept the first 5 books of the Bible, but they developed different traditions and customs from the rest of Israel, and that caused strain between the two groups, which is why we see that tension in the Bible with stories between Israelites and Samaritans. So back to our reading for today, that Samaritan that came by, clearly Jesus wants us to recognize that the person who stopped and who helped was an outsider. The Samaritan doesn't ask what will happen to him. He asks what will happen to the man in the ditch if he walks by. And then he acts. In this parable, Jesus is offering more than a moral lesson. He's offering a vision of God's kingdom where mercy overrides tribalism, where compassion beats out fear, and where neighbors are found not through proximity, but through love. But love, we all know, is not always clean and easy. And sometimes love looks like stopping in the middle of a busy street. Sometimes it looks like getting your hands dirty or risking your safety, giving from your own resources. Sometimes love feels irrational. Years ago, my husband, John, and I took our kids to New York City for the first time. And I'd say they were maybe like 4, 8, and 10 years old at the time. And it was a pilgrimage of sorts for the kids anyway, to those two meccas, the American Girl store and the Pokemon Center. Two sacred destinations, at least in their eyes. And John and I had both lived in big cities for years. He had lived in New York, I had lived in Washington, D.C., and so we were comfortable with crowds and subways and street life. But our children were small town kids. The town they were raised in only had 900 people, and the big town next door where they went to school had about 1,500. They had never encountered the kind of homelessness and poverty that it was impossible to miss on the streets of Manhattan. And as we walked towards those iconic toy stores, our kids began asking hard, innocent questions. Why is that man sitting on the sidewalk? Why is that woman holding a sign? Why do they look so sad? Why are we walking past them? They noticed something that we, in our adult efficiency and city experience, had stopped seeing. And they asked the question that haunts me to this day: why aren't we stopping to help? Well, what could we say? We gave the answers lots of people give. We can't help everyone, we don't have enough cash on us, we don't know what they'll do with it, it might not be safe. And then we gave them the worst response of all: just don't look, keep walking. But the truth, the painful, undeniable truth, was that we didn't want to be interrupted. We didn't want to have our day complicated. We didn't want to see. And our children saw what we wouldn't. And the memory of that day stayed with them. 2 of them ended up in large cities for college. One spent several mornings a month in a homeless shelter cooking breakfast for the residents. And another worked on a project in Boston to record and preserve the stories of homeless individuals. And our daughter would call and tell me about the people she had met, people who once had jobs and families and homes, people who were teachers and parents and veterans, people who were like us. And she would remind me again and again, we could be one of them, Mom. And that is what the Samaritan saw, not just a bleeding man in a ditch, but himself. That man's suffering became his own. That man's fate mattered. And that, Jesus says, is what it means to love our neighbor as ourselves. It doesn't mean love the neighbor who looks like you, or love the neighbor who shares your religion or citizenship, or love the neighbor who's been properly vetted and is probably safe. It says love your neighbor as yourself, even, perhaps especially, when that neighbor is a stranger. And that's the challenge, to see not a threat, but a person, not a category, but a soul, not a problem, but a beloved child of God. It's easy to say we care. It's easy to write a check, and I don't mean stop writing checks. But it's much harder to look someone in the eye, to stop and to act. And love, real love, is not passive. It's not abstract. It is not well-meaning thoughts and feelings. Love is active and tangible and embodied. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. The Samaritan didn't theorize. He didn't pray about it first. He acted. He bandaged. He lifted. He carried. He paid. He returned. We complicate love. We rationalize inaction. But the call is clear. There's something else about this passage that we sometimes overlook, and that is that everyone in this story is on a journey. The man who is attacked is traveling on the road. The priest and the Levite are on their way somewhere. The Samaritan is moving too. Even Jesus, when telling the story, is on the way to Jerusalem on the road to the cross. And so are we. We are on a journey, not just in the literal sense, but in the spiritual sense. We are moving through life, being shaped and challenged and called to grow. Which means that even if we failed to stop in the past, even if we looked away in New York City or from the news or from our own neighbors, it's not too late. It's never too late to turn back. Never too late to become more like the Samaritan. Never too late to learn to see others with the eyes of compassion. We are not called to save the whole world, but we are called to act when the world brings someone in need right into our path. It might be a refugee in a shelter, a child crossing the border, a person on the highway exit ramp holding a cardboard sign. It might be a friend going through a crisis, or a family member struggling with addiction, or a neighbor who has lost their job. Whoever it is, wherever they come from, the question remains, what will happen to them if I do not stop? Jesus tells us what love looks like. Dr. King echoes the same. And our children, if we're willing to listen, remind us again. Which of these, Jesus asked, was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The one who showed him mercy. Go and do likewise. Amen.